Materialism without materialism. Critic of Q.Meillassoux. Author of the recently published book After Finitude provides to us a new version of materialism, neither dogmatic or metaphysical, but at once speculative. However, is speculative materialism of Q.Meillassoux really materialistic? And if so, what kind of materialism it really represents? This paper considers the main provisions of his book, which can question the very nature of this materialistic doctrine. First, difference between subject and the world. The problem that constitutes the subject of author's research lays in ability of think absolute, accepting not only the speculative installation of Hume's empiricism, but also suggesting impossibility of its positive decision related to the search of the necessary beings, which is the absolute foundation of itself and the world. Nevertheless, this question itself is not clear, as it implies existence of, first, the difference between the conceivable world and thinking subject, which is based on secondary, more general distinction between thought and being, which is more or less common to modern European philosophy since Descartes, and problematization of possibility of the absolute knowledge is possible due to these conditions. Taken directly, these differences constitute a dualistic worldview. Occurred once on Descartes, it was subjected to further criticism from both sides. So Spinoza, Hegel, Engels, Lenin and Mao Zedong criticized the duality of thought and being from the standpoint of objectivity and substantiality, advancing Cartesian dualism to materialism in theory and in practice. Berkeley, Hume, Kant, then positivist followers, Comte, Avenarius, Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Karl Popper and others, and phenomenologists, mainly Husserl and Heidegger, bring subjectivity and baselessness to this dualism, naturally reaching subjective idealism. Meillassoux fairly points out that consistently disclosed correlationistic position leads to solipsism. However, he leaves without a critical comprehension the base this concerning reality of the distinction between being and thought, consequently between the subject and the world, reasoning within a given by modern European subjectivist metaphysics conceptual framework, which he claims to overcome. Consequently, the dualism of being and thought implicitly persists, questioning not only the material unity of the world, but also involvement of the thinking subject. In other words, Meillassoux retains chains of the existence of demons, angels, and other supernatural creatures, along with material objects, as well as he does not clarity clarify the character of interaction between ideal and material objects. Thus, the necessary materiality of all existing objects, which constitutes the basis of every philosophical materialism, remains unproved, as well as the relationship between consciousness and being. Therefore, the implication of the thinking subject to the world persists unestablished. Meillassoux writes, in any case, philosopher who recognized the legitimacy of the transcendental revolution, i.e., everyone who considers himself as post-critical and not dogmatical, go agree that it is naive to believe in the possibility of thinking something, ignoring the fact that we still think, that we still Meillassoux writes, in any case, philosopher who recognized the legitimacy of the transcendental revolution, i.e., everyone who considers himself as a post-critical and not dogmatic, go agree that it is naive to believe in the possibility of thinking something, ignoring the fact that we still think this something. Compare with if you are against the correlation, you overlook that it is you who contradict. Therefore, from the point of view of your mind, of your culture, of your age, etc., thereby directly maintain the isolation of the thinking subject from conceivable world. On the contrary, the materialistic answer to the question who thinks the world lies in the fact that the world himself thinks and feels itself through us. Therefore, thinking is an intrinsic attribute of being. The subject is a part of the world. In this case, problematization of knowability of the world and of the absolute is outraced, since these phenomena don't divide but connect the subject and the world. Second, ontology and epistemology. This omission manifests another weak spot in Meillassoux' reasoning, which consists in mixing ontology and epistemology. Taken as a starting point position of transcendental subject, fenced from the objective reality by a stone wall of subjective feelings, according to the new European idealistic metaphysics. Author does not distinguish between ontological and epistemological aspects of the fundamental question of philosophy. The former refers to the problem of the intelligible content of phenomenal forms of the world. The latter refers to the problem of the knowability of the world, thus mixing two different problems, absolutizing position of skepticism. Meillassoux deduces the principle of factuality, which allows him to hypostatize epistemological contingency of forms of the world as an ontological absolute. This Hume's agnosticism assumes existence of the transcendental subject as an axiom and plays here the role of amplifying argument, since the assumption that it is possible to know special or any case general content of the phenomena is rejected as dogmatic by default. But this solution appears unsatisfactory. If things in themselves exist, every particular phenomenon can be caused by the actual object that was adequate in his phenomenon, by hallucination due to use of psychoactive substances, by the brain work in a dream, or a powerful computer such as in the Matrix. However, in all of these cases, a special content of the phenomenal form differs, while the general content remains to be material. Conversely, if the phenomenon of table appears due to God, to an angel, to a bodhisattva, or universal will, and other metaphysical entities, the general content of the phenomenon is in any case the ideal, the supernatural, and the transcendental. Therefore, only the assumption of contingency within the materiality of universal substance of all phenomena would be materialistic decision of the ontological aspect of the basic question of philosophy, while the Meillassoux decision absolutizing contingency of the substance of events necessarily leads to idealism, allowing existence of not only material but also ideal, supernatural beings within the hyperchaos, which is transcendental to knowing subject. Third, rejection of the principle of sufficient reason. This incoherency in its turn to related to the Meillassoux' rejection of the principle of sufficient reason, since it implies the existence and knowability of necessary beings, which Meillassoux as well as Hume considers as kind of dogmatism. Repeal of the principle of sufficient reason entails a rejection of the notion of substance as a universal substrate, which in turn makes it impossible to determine matter as a substance of all things, and thus calls into question the unity of the world, which consists not in its being but in its materiality, as shown above. Rejection of the unity of the world, along with the assumption of supernatural, spiritual beings living in a hypothetical hyperchaos, can hardly be described as materialistic position, in spite of the author of assurances. Denying validity of the principle of sufficient reason, that entails problematization of the unity of the world, entails also the problematization of the unity of the hyperchaos, which Meillassoux offers instead of the classic substance. For example, it is possible to imagine the existence of a plurality of various hyperchaoses, which never interact with each other and which are transcendent with respect to each other, or would prevent hyperchaos from irretrievable decay at some point. In this case, there must be some medium that can separate various hyperchaoses. The speculative investigation of its nature leads to the very wilds of metaphysics, which Meillassoux wants to avoid. However, he makes this conclusion and writes the following: I pretend to know that the world is destructible as well as this book. This ridiculous, absurd reproduces an even worse form of metaphysical idea of the heat, death of the universe, or warm tone, refuted more than a century ago by Engels, or worse idea of Christian Judeo-Christianic idea of apocalypse, end of the world, Armageddon, and other metaphysics. Fourth, rejection of objectivity of contradictions. The fourth Meillassoux thesis concerns his refusal of objectivity of contradiction, that entails the impossibility to explain the motion of objects, which is explained in dialectical materialism by internal and external contradictions forcing them to move and to change. The logical contradiction of this line lay in denial of causality as such, and asserting that all natural things rise, last and die spontaneously, without any whatsoever reason. However, the fact that every movement is a resolution of the conflict was proved by Hegel and Engels. They proved that the only objective contradiction can be the basis of the process as a process within includes actual beings and change of each thing. Meillassoux interprets the principle of sufficient reason metaphysically. He refers it only to the existent condition of a thing, not to her transition into a different state. Thus, thinking sufficient reason singular and consistent, it is impossible to explain movement of things. On this basis, Meillassoux refuses from the principle of sufficient reason and from the objectivity of contradictions. Moreover, refusal from the objectivity of contradiction and from the principle of sufficient reason leads to disruption of the theory of substance and of material unity of the world. In fact, the eternal substance, which includes fullness of objective contradictions, has nothing externally outside itself. It includes all possible changes and transformations, remaining identity to itself and distinct from itself, at the same time as it is the case in the Hegel's system and in dialectical materialism. At the same time, the rejection of objectivity of contradiction does not allow the substance to be both identical and different, which leads to an obviously metaphysical conclusion. The fixed world, unjustly decaying into many transcendent to each other worlds. Finally, the rejection of causality as a principle which combines the principle of sufficient reason and objectivity of contradictions leads Q.Meillassoux to the doctrine of contingency of laws of nature, which in his opinion can spontaneously change in consequences of fluctuation of hyper-chaos. This conclusion is closely linked with the Meillassoux acceptance of Wittgenstein's definition of life. To be it means to be a fact. Cf. with world is the totality of facts, not of things. Or something may happen or may not happen, everything else will be the same. Thus, the material bodies interconnected with each other by relations of causality are replaced by unconnected phenomenal facts, which may be anything within the formal logical consistency. In fact, the materialistic hypothesis of the eternity and infinity of the universe assumes identify In fact, the materialistic hypothesis of the eternity of and infinity of the universe assumes infinite manifold of forms of motion of matter. In different sites in its physical laws may act differently. Also, laws and physical constants may change with transformation of material substrate, but the changes themselves of natural laws can be derived only from the changes in material substrate on which they carried out through the influence of hidden contradictions. The rejection of the principle of causality necessarily entails dogmatism regarding to the absence of ontological foundations of the world, and fideism in relation to the spiritual beings that can spontaneously arise from the hyper-chaos. Fifth, practical consequences. Fifth thesis, which does not allow to accept Meillassoux' doctrine as materialistic, concerns practical conclusions about lifestyle which follows from author's picture of the world. Although Meillassoux does not give in his book specific practical conclusions, we can try to trace them by the initial judgments which he defends. So, if objective contradictions do not exist, neither in social or outsocial nature, it means that there are no contradictions between labor and capital, and consequently between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Hence, the Marxist theory of class struggle does not express the objective contradictions of social life. It expresses subjective desire of the author of this theory, which in this case loses its scientific and theoretical status and becomes a subjective belief, getting a pair with astrology, hieromancy and other metaphysics. Their conclusions also contradict with the position of the author of the foreword to after finitude Meillassoux' teacher, French philosopher Alain Badiou, who defends the theory of class struggle up to the recognition of the dictatorship of the proletariat. At the same time, the negation of the material unity of the world, associated with the rejection of the principle of sufficientism, leads to recognition of transcendent worlds and spiritual beings whose existence just approved by the mystics, spirits, clericals and other metaphysicians. However, belief in the existence of supernatural phenomena is a clear sign of not materialistic but idealistic doctrine. Thus, recovery of the idealism by Meillassoux occurs not only in theoretical but also in a practical level. Conclusions. We can draw the following conclusions of the base of reviewed provisions which Meillassoux puts forward in the text of After Finitude. First, intention of Meillassoux' research aimed at overcoming the subjective idealistic and correlationistic metaphysics and at recovery of discussion about the nature of the absolute from materialistic position is an expression of an important and positive trend in modern philosophy. Nevertheless, a number of Meillassoux' assumptions does not allow to characterize his conception in form in which it is represented in After Finitude as materialistic and non-metaphysical. Third, the reasons which led to the incorrect solution of author's problems lie in the field of non-critical posing and of problems and can be solved through more thoroughly deconstruction of transcendental modern European metaphysics, from which they were borrowed. Thus, although the Meillassoux ideas outlined in After Finitude do not reach their goals, they have a value of a negative experience, showing obviously perspectiveless ways of overcoming modern European transcendental metaphysics. They allow to future researchers of these problems more accurately formulate methods and development techniques of materialistic and non-metaphysical discourse of the absolute. Thanks for watching.